Hi there. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Human Factors Toolkit. I hope this is useful for you. I do have some disclosures which you need to be aware of. So, life as a surgeon is interesting to say the least. If you've read Henry Marsh's book, René Lariche is quoted at the beginning, and I think a lot of you may identify with this quote. And in fact, if you don't identify with it now, you certainly will do during your consultant career. So I'll just read it to you. Every surgeon carries within himself a small cemetery where from time to time he goes to pray, a place of bitterness and regret where he must look for an explanation for his failures. And really, that's the crux of the job that we do. It's tough, it's technically challenging, but we expect ourselves to have reached that level of competence and even go on to mastery. But what makes a good surgeon is the ability to have good situational awareness, good team working, excellent communication, and to use some of the tools around. So I'm going to explore some of these areas. I'll touch on why it's so important. We'll look at workload and stress, and then perhaps some of the toolkits that may help us as surgeons. Well, we know the impact on performance is huge. Human factors is key to team dynamics, and therefore its impacts on patient safety and outcome. And ultimately, that's what you are interested in. So it should not be so easy to make errors. If you look at these vials of drugs, on the top you see ephedrine, and if you read along, ephedrine, and then heparin. So if you are tired, fatigued, stressed for some other reason, and you injected the wrong drug, this would have catastrophic impact on the patient and undoubtedly your career. And if you look down at these vials below, there's dexamethasone, and of course there's the hidden adrenaline in there. So this does happen, and we know in surgery we have the furthest to fall. So there are very well documented examples of wrong site surgery, but this was a very interesting case where a surgeon removed the wrong and only functioning kidney. Interestingly, the whole situation is complicated, so I wouldn't even go and say there's one reason why this happened. But there was a medical student and a nurse in the room, and perhaps because of dysfunctional team dynamics, the mode of communication, or other situational awareness factors, things went wrong. And of course, that surgeon did not turn up to do a bad job that day. So we've been through this human factors principles. Error is normal, and it doesn't matter who you are. If you're the street sign writer or a highly trained medical professional, you can make error. And performance is variable. This is an experiment with medical students putting green and red beads into a pot. And you can see that after about 17 hours, performance really starts to drop off drastically, having been stable for about 13 hours. And by 24 hours, you have a performance that can be similar to having significant amounts of alcohol in your bloodstream. So performance is variable, and we have to have systems and processes to protect us, but we have to realize that people and culture interact with these systems and processes. So I would commend to you the concept of the vulnerable human. We have to realize that no system is foolproof. So I've touched upon mental models and situational awareness in the past, so I'm going to very briefly go through this. What do you see in this image? Take some time to have a look at it. Some of you may see some lovers, But if I asked you to count the number of dolphins that you see in the picture, things change. And I think it's important to be aware that members of your team have a different mental model, and as leaders, it is our job to try and get everyone aligned, seeing the same thing. Similarly, if I asked you to think of a taxi, you may think of one of these if you grew up in New York, or one of these if you're from London, or one of these. So there's a whole host of different images that can be conjured up by our brains, which, the brain is desperately trying to make sense of the world around us as quickly as it can. And that is always influenced by our conditioning, by our upbringing, by geography, and those other factors. So just be aware of the mental model, but also of your own level of arousal, stress, and fatigue. So this is a very well-known curve, and some people would disagree with the basis of this, but essentially, as we increase workload, our performance gets better. So that if you're low workload, performance is probably pretty poor because you're a bit lethargic and not really on it. But when you're busy, you're in the zone and you reach your personal best. And then if we overload you, you have your performance drops off, and this is a danger zone. But think of your co-worker. You're all brilliant, but you must work with Frank the Plank, and his or her performance is slightly below yours. But what I would say to you is this could be your performance at two different times, and we can be all affected by our physiology, our psyche, interpersonal relationships, what's going on around us, the environment, and also the technology. You turn up to do an operation and you haven't got the right kit, or you're operating in COVID times and you have to wait a long time for patients to be put to sleep. Performance can change. And then we have all of that context to put around thinking and doing. We know that if you're a systems analyst and your demands to think are great, your physical ability is reduced. However, if you're Usain Bolt and you're at this end, running the 100 meters Olympic sprint, your ability to do thinking tasks is reduced. So you can see there's a limit of capacity depending on whether you're thinking or doing. And if you cross those, you could get out of control. And equally, there is a difficult area low down in the low thinking, low doing space. Do you believe that this is a thing? Well, this is my son Noah, and he's going to take part in an experiment with me.
Hi Noah, thank you for doing this exercise. You know your alphabet. Can you say the alphabet forward for me, please? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, V, W, X, Y, Z. Fantastic. Now, are you okay at catching a ball? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw a ball to you. Just throw it up and down and catch it in one hand. That's it. Okay, now can you say the alphabet going forward whilst throwing the ball? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, V, W, X, Y, Z. Fantastic. Keep bouncing the ball. And now I want you to say the alphabet backwards. Keep the ball going. Z, Y, X, W. Thank you.
So he's an intelligent guy, and you can tell as soon as I put the huge level of thinking on his brain, the accuracy of his task reduced. So the accuracy of the throw, the height of the throw, the frequency of the throw, but also he found it very difficult to think backwards. So I think we have to take this seriously in our surgical lives as well. And this goes to our decision making, because we tend to spend most of our time as human beings using system 1 of our brain. This is the fast thinking, quick answer part of the brain. It's our primitive brain. It's intuitive. It's what where most of our mistakes happen, and often there aren't many options. If you get it wrong, thinking like this, the consequences are often catastrophic. But how about the system 2 brain? This is the more deliberate side of our brain. It's the method we are taught during our training. It uses situational assessment. We generate options. We select those options and we review outcomes. So this is a much safer place to inhabit in our surgical world. And we've got to be open-minded, whether it's diagnostic or therapeutic, whether you're thinking or doing. We can end up having thinking errors. So we can become tunnel visioned. We can have confirmation bias, where new information doesn't actually make us think differently. We simply use that new information to reinforce a way of thinking or a belief that we already had, rather than saying, oh, why is this new bit of information here? And stress, fatigue, and distraction can make all of this much worse. And we can end up with the leading question to basically help us build that confirmational bias. So how do we mitigate? We have to practice. We have to have thinking practice, and we have to have a great deal of situational awareness. And probably the most important time is reduce our own time pressures. So what about the toolkit? Well, toolkit number 1. This is the handover. And you have to think about this as a transfer of data. So you have to package the data and information and insight all very, very neatly. You have to make sure that it's a handover of responsibility. So just telling something to somebody doesn't mean that the handover has happened. It's actually somebody accepting the responsibility as well. And you have to think about the point of transfer, because distractions, poor or incomplete information can make things worse. So doing your handover correctly and doing it in a structured manner are number 1 in your toolbox. Number 2 is the briefing. So you'll all agree that if you have a task, you have to define what that goal is. And you'll also all agree that as a team, we have to share what we know and what we understand. Then the third part of this briefing is you've got a goal, you've vocalized it to everyone, but you now have to vocalize the plan and everyone's responsibility within that plan. And this is the bit that I find very interesting. Lots of people in our briefings get very embarrassed. What can go wrong? As if nothing can go wrong. But of course, everything can go wrong. And you have to pick out the things that are likely to go wrong. How will we know? And how do we recover that situation? So briefing is really important. And we know that there is a multitude of publications that reinforce and evidence this. This is a data-rich area. We know that briefings and checklists improve outcomes. And this goes back 10, 15 years ago. You can look at the effects of a comprehensive surgical safety system. If you look at the post-implementation of interventions for safety and look at the y-axis, which is number of complications per 100,000 patients, you can see the hospitals where there were interventions, i.e. the blue bars, the number of complications was significantly reduced. And this has been shown to be very much the case for morbidity and mortality. So the evidence is out there. But it's interesting, human factors do have a very positive effect on safety and team working. But, you must have examples of very poor rigor at doing the checklist. So, surgeon scrubbing up, scrub nurse in the prep room, anaesthetist at the highest point of their workload are now going through the checklist, and it's not done as a challenge. And anaesthetists find it very hard to positively engage in this because of the structure of the checklist. So it has to be worked on. And I urge you to think about doing the checklist properly, because otherwise you end up like a cargo cult. So cargo cults were these cults in the Melanesian islands. It's where less developed societies wait on higher technologically developed societies to bring in goods and services that were associated with when they were there. So in the Second World War, the Western forces were in these islands. They brought food and drink and good stuff. And then the war ended and they all disappeared. So what did the Melanesian islanders do? They thought, well, if we recreate the environment, then the good stuff will all come back. So they actually made runways here that they made. These weren't real runways. They made conning towers out of coconut leaves and aeroplanes, thinking if they recreated something that looked like the past, then the good stuff would return, the aircraft would come back. And of course it didn't. And this is just like a poorly performed surgical checklist at surgery. You know, just because you do the checklist doesn't mean that all those items have been addressed. Is there blood available? And we think, well, a patient wouldn't have come to theatre without blood being available, but of course no one's checked. Number 3 in our surgical toolbox is the debrief. And debrief is done universally badly because I think people don't really understand what we should do. This should all be about learning. And learning has to be timely and close to the time that the incident or event took place. So you look at what was expected, let's say in an operating room or a ward round. Then you can look at what happened, why there was a difference, and then you can look at what was learnt. And this can be snappy. It can be 2 to 3 minutes. And everyone should be involved in this because, again, think about the mental model. People look at things very differently. So the key message to take away is high-performing teams use the patient safety toolkit. Absolutely. They also receive training on the tools available. So it's not a two-dimensional way of using this stuff. And it needs audit and feedback on performance, and therefore it needs leaders to actually press this and continue to develop it. So in summary, I would say to you, understand your own performance, your own level of arousal, your fatigue, your stress. Are your buckets full? Have some situational awareness and actually practice this. Look at the patterns of behaviour, look at feedback, ensure that you've got some allies who are able to speak truth to you. I think the second area is to create a working environment where hierarchies are flattened and everyone can question and contribute. So team dynamics is key. Authority gradients need to be looked at. And then finally, utilise the tools that make safety simple. The briefing, the sign-in, the timeout, the debrief and after-action review. Look at checklists and how they're done and what training has been done. Follow the ABCs, it's simple. And don't let familiarity breed contempt. This is all about a journey from competence to mastery, and that's what we're trying to achieve in our surgical lives. I hope this has been useful.